Welcome indeed, everyone. My name is Martin Weinstein. I'm the founder and lead researcher at the Yale University's Open Innovation Lab and founder of the Open Earth Foundation. And very excited to help co-host this webinar with Miroslav as part of a side event from the UN High-Level Political Forum that's really exciting, happening as we speak, and we can further our discussions within the context of that and the general roadmap for the year. I'd like to just make one more technical comment. So you will see that everyone that doesn't have their video on will show up in your screen. For example, if when you look at it as a grid view, one thing that will significantly improve your experience is to what is in Zoom, hide non-video participants. And to do that, you just use your mouse and scroll over any of the dark boxes that has the person's name without a video, and then you'll find a three blue button, and then just press on that three blue button, and then you'll find the option of hide non-video participants, in which case you will only see the speakers, and we ask the speakers to do turn on their video so that it creates a bit more of a webinar experience. You're also free to use the chat to connect, and we'll be taking questions and create a bit of more of a panel experience in the latter part of the talk. With that quick admin, I might do a longer intro further on, but perhaps that's a good time for Miroslav to do some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Martin. Great working with you again on this webinar. So welcome everybody to the UN High-Level Political Forum 2020 side event on Pacts, Bonds, Digital Innovation for Youth Engagement in Climate Action and Agenda 2030 Implementation. My name is Miroslav Polzer. I'm the founder and CEO of the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges. And today's event is being organized by my organization, but also in cooperation with the Yale Open Innovation Lab, the Open Climate Collaborathon that Martin will present in more detail later, and also in cooperation with UNESCO Management of Social Transformation Program and UN Habitat Youth Program and the Climate Change Coalition and Glotcher Foundation, New York. And the main message of our side event today, perhaps first a brief background information. These organizations have worked already together in the past in the field of harnessing digital innovation for youth engagement and multi-stakeholder engagement in general in climate action and in Agenda 2030 implementation. And at the last conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change process in Madrid in December last year, we have created the Digital Innovation Community, which really wants to help the United Nations processes and global community in general to harness the potentials of digital innovation for better implementation of global goals, and especially, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement climate action. And so with today's event, which is the third webinar, we've had one webinar on the 8th of June in the context of the June Momentum series of the UN Climate Change Secretariat and the launch of the Race to Zero Climate Ambition Mobilization Campaign. There we have tried to show how digital innovation can in general support the climate action efforts and the global climate action governance. Then we've had on the 26th of June another webinar. It was the UN 75 All of Society Digital Cooperation for Global Goals and Climate Action webinar, where we said, how can digital innovation help rethink the operating system of global community, how the different stakeholders work together and contribute resources and action to global goals. And today's webinar is now complementing the first two webinars which have been focused on the UN system, but now we are going to really look how can we help the individual citizen and a young person to really take meaningful and rewardingly action for global goals. And we are in the title, there's already our solution formula for this. We are saying we need pacts, bonds, and digital innovation. So Pacts means social innovation and also a cultural innovation where we get on the local level everybody empowered and connected so that cooperation and collaboration for the common good is possible. Bonds stands for innovative resource mobilization, because digital innovation enables, especially blockchain technology, enables new forms of financial resources mobilization in trusted and very effective contexts. And digital innovation is about the fact that with blockchain technology and other technologies, we can now organize in a more effective and a more low-cost way multi-stakeholder cooperation and multi-stakeholder engagement in climate action. And we are going to show you some very concrete solutions and activities that we are working on as a consortium, because we need all these solution elements to work together, and therefore the different partners of today's event and the speakers are somehow an element of a systemic solution that we are putting forward. And therefore that's somehow my introductory statement. And with this I am delighted to give the floor to Heta Laktami, the youth constituency representative within the UNFCCC process and global climate action leader. Heta, we are delighted and honored to have you with us. Please take the floor and tell us your initial thoughts on these topics.
Thank you, Miro. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think, you know, when we talk about youth climate action nowadays, and thankfully, like over the past couple of years, you know, youth climate action is actually picking up. And it's definitely picking up within governments, it's picking up within civil society. It's now, at least, you know, when you talk about young people and climate change, it's not very unheard of, which is a good step, but it's only a small step in the right direction. What we need definitely is more and more young people to be able to take climate action right where they are. And what does that mean? That means that, you know, youth should be empowered. First, they need the education. They need the awareness and they need the capacity to understand what climate change is and how their lives are affected by the climate crisis. And then in addition to that, they need training and they need capacity building to help train themselves, to give them the equipment, to give them the knowledge, the resources that young people need to be able to fight the climate crisis. And this you need not necessarily need not necessarily be extremely fancy, extremely high, technologically savvy. All we need is basic capacity building knowledge and resources and funds for youth to take action where they are. Basically link them to their local governments, help youth, link them to their communities, to their national governments, and then eventually also link youth to the international stage. Because of course, when we talk about climate change and when we talk about decisions like the Paris Agreement, which are being taken internationally to fight the climate crisis, this also means that it's very clear that the climate crisis affects the future of the youth and the generations to come. So when we talk about these decisions that are being taken, we're talking about the future of these young people. And I think it's only fair that our future is not negotiated by somebody else, and that we have a seat at the same decision-making tables where everyone else is making these decisions on the climate crisis, or making these international policies, on what countries should be doing, on how much ambition is going to be there, how do we increase ambition, or what else do we need to fight the climate crisis. And as you've seen, of course, youth have been taking to the streets, young people have been striking from schools, they've been skipping classes, they've been telling the governments that, we stand by the science and we stand by what is actually right, and we stand by a just future for us and for the generations to come. And this is extremely important because we talk about climate change, we automatically talk about climate justice. And climate justice means that, if there is a country which is developed, it has developed at the cost of the countries which are developing today. But similarly, the price of climate change is being paid by the generations who are young today and who are still yet to come in the near future. And they're going to be paying the price of the climate crisis. They're going to be living through the climate crisis a lot more, and their lives are going to be affected first when it comes to talking about, what's going to happen in the next 10 years, 15 years, 5 years, in that sense. So we need to have climate justice to ensure that young people have a voice and that youth are not left in the most vulnerable category. And when it comes to youth, it's a whole gamut of young people. It's young people from indigenous backgrounds, indigenous youth who do not have access to resources that most other young people have. Also, when you talk about within countries, there's a huge divide in a lot of countries, including mine in India, with socioeconomic classes and backgrounds. So between a rural youth and an urban youth, the access to education, the access to resources that young people have across the world, across sectors, especially young women and girls, is extremely different. And youth go across a whole range. Youth itself is a vulnerable category, but across sectors, youth grow across different ranges of how vulnerable young people are, and how youth from different backgrounds are actually, facing the climate crisis already today. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that youth are empowered, youth have the knowledge, youth have the resources to fight the climate crisis. They need to be given, and we need to ensure that governments are listening to the young people. In a lot of countries, there is a lot of talk about climate change, but if you actually see how many young people are involved in the national processes, how many young people have been involved in the revision of the NDCs, which is the nationally determined contributions, which is currently taking place under the Paris Agreement, it's very, very minor. And youth consultations across the world globally are extremely, extremely rare when it comes to revised NDCs, when it comes to youth participation, when it comes to education, when it comes to capacity building for climate change. So this is what we need to ensure that is changed. And what we are seeing today, in fact, I think is great. Because of the COVID crisis, the world went under lockdown. But we've also realized that climate change is not going to stop, and it's not going to wait for the COVID crisis to end and then figure out thinking about the climate crisis. And I think this was a great switch that young people realized. And within a few weeks, within a few months, all of these strikes which were on the streets, all of the meetings that were happening in person, all of the coordination that usually happened only in person became digital. And I think, of course, everyone went digital, but I think the switch was much faster with young people. It was much faster with youth who could pick up to this challenge. And they use different social media platforms, they use different digital platforms to ensure that youth are coordinated and that the voice of youth on the climate crisis, on the environmental crisis, does not stop. So I think this is what we need to do. We definitely need more digital support. We need more technological support. We definitely need more resources, including funding for young people. And we need to ensure that youth voices across the world are given priority by governments, by local governments, national governments, as well as international governments, because youth have the knowledge, they have the experience, they shouldn't be shunned just because of their age. And I think it is very clear in today's times when young people are coming up with different innovations, different technologies to fight, either local solutions to climate crisis or local for waste management, whether it's water conservation, whether it's another issue locally, or combating international issues, or taking part in international policy making decisions. We have seen that young people are not behind it anymore. So I think it's high time we recognize the potential that youth have, and we give them the due, and we ensure that youth voices, all our voices, are heard at the same table where decisions are made about our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hita, for your powerful voice and for all your civic engagement on the global climate action scene. I remember you said that you have had also a call today with the UK COP26 presidency on the preparations. Are there any news that are related to digital innovation or youth engagement activities over the coming months that our audience might perhaps be interested?
Yeah, so this is something I think that even the COP team itself is still figuring out how and what to do with this whole shift and how to ensure that momentum is being kept. But within the UNFCCC and also within the COP presidency, within the team of the COP, there have been meetings. We're trying to also work with them to ensure that we're not losing out on momentum. So we're working with them to ensure that there are online events, there are digital events where young people are participating, that is actually youth-led, and which also moves beyond just the COP and the UNFCCC, but also we're working with other UN bodies to ensure that this connect between different issues, whether it's human rights, whether it's climate change, whether it's human rights and climate change, or any other related issues, are not left behind. And young people definitely, and I think this has become it just in itself has made itself more accessible for youth to join, because a lot of times when we meet in person, a lot of young people who do not have the funds or cannot travel for whatever reason miss out on engaging in all of these platforms. But here, because since everything is digital, young people need to just be in their homes, just have an internet connection, and then can be part of programs like this where I am today. So I think this has definitely opened doors for a lot of young people and made things a lot more accessible for youth across.
Definitely, one of the big opportunities that the current challenge that we all face is that perhaps if we do this right, there's a lot more inclusivity that we can have in the right discussions by allowing virtual participation. That was an extremely inspiring kickoff, and we'll continue on like youth engagement innovation in the fourth block. So at the large level, the way that the rest of the session is organized around 4 thematic blocks. The first one being around Pacts that Miroslav started discussing, which is really at the heart of social innovation and reimagining our social contract. The second one's on finance and bonds and how to mobilize capital. The third one is on digital innovation and digital infrastructure that we must share. And the fourth one is, of course, to wrap up and continue to close the loop, let's say, on youth engagement innovation. Thank you everyone for all our speakers. We have some amazing speakers joining from UNESCO, UN Habitat, some really high level discussions. With that, I'll pass that for Miro to introduce the next thematic block, which is specifically on Pacts and kick us off on that first block.
Thank you very much. And Hita, as you're in India, for other people to know, it's already very late there, so that they will not be surprised if you then early leave. We are grateful that you stayed up so long to be with us and for sharing your views. So the first element of the solutions that we are proposing here is now Pacts and social innovation to really get young people empowered to take action, and especially citizens. And we have as a first speaker John Crawley, who is a senior official at the UNESCO and leading the management of social transformation program. John is a very visionary and open-minded person. We have already implemented together several events on and activities on ethics for climate act, the role of ethics in climate action, about using a Global Challenges Youth Music Contest for engagement of young people and to getting new visions of a sustainable world. And together we also launched the Give Youth a Chance resource mobilization campaign for youth climate action empowerment in Marrakesh in 2016. And I'm delighted that John is with us again, and we are looking forward to hear your thoughts and ideas because this is an important knowledge base for our work. John, please.
Thank you very much, Miro. Is the sound okay?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much for the invitation. As you indicated, we've done this kind of thing before, but it's always a pleasure to do it again. We've spoken about this kind of subject before, but not exactly in this format. So it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to add some thoughts on the connection between climate action, digital transformations, new social contract, and youth engagement, which is a lot to deal with, but I'll try and make some connections. And ultimately, the connection is the one that Heta made. And I'd just like to echo what I saw as her key point, which fits in just 4 words: new resources, new action potentials. The challenge being to create the conditions where those new action potentials can exist, in particular through youth engagement. And that requires new resources, not just more of the old kind of resources in new places, so not just flows of money, but also new ways of thinking about resources. And digital innovation encourages us to think about resources in a profoundly different way. I should add that while my specific responsibility within UNESCO is to run our programs on social transformations, that's closely connected to colleagues just a few meters away in the building who deal with UNESCO's programs on youth, which are ambitious and central to UNESCO's mandate. We are committed, as Heta was saying, to the idea that young people should be fully involved as change agents in international discussions and processes, not just added at the last minute to a panel for tokenistic reasons or simply listened to as potential beneficiaries. So we're very much on the same page in that respect. With respect to the new action potentials that need to be developed, I think it's important to be clear that we are effectively criticizing the existing international setup with respect to climate change. Of course, as an official of the United Nations, there are limits to how critical I can be, but still, it needs to be criticized. And the criticism, I think, goes in 2 main directions, both of which are extremely familiar, widely recognized by the specialists in this area. The first is that trying to frame response to climate change as primarily a matter of global burden sharing produces perverse incentives, log jams, blockages, which actually ensure that you produce the opposite of what you're looking for. By defining the issue as sharing a burden, you guarantee that the burden will not be shared. In addition, second problem, it shouldn't be defined as a burden. One of the biggest problems in my view, and I've been tracking this for 25 years in various capacities, is that the international climate change agenda has siloed off climate change from the broader picture of social transformations. It's even succeeded often in cordoning off climate change from other aspects of environmental transformations. The result is that climate change is defined as a separate issue to be achieved in its own terms with specific agreements and costs of action associated directly and exclusively with climate change. Everyone knows this isn't the right way of doing it, but the institutional design has produced the perverse effect that this is the default mode of thinking about climate change. In fact, let me just take a couple of very obvious examples. Many of the levers of action to respond to greenhouse gas emissions, excessive rate and growth of greenhouse gas emissions, are things that we should be doing anyway for other reasons. We should be reducing vehicle pollution in cities for reasons of noise pollution and atmospheric pollution, both of which are public health issues. You can fully justify what you do simply by reference to that. What I mean is not that climate change just gets diluted. There are some specific issues, particularly in, say, the electricity sector. But what I do mean is that the challenge is to introduce new connections, to allow us to grasp the way in which climate change is a dimension of everything going on in the world, not a separate issue that is solved separately from the other things going on in the world. And again, at a theoretical level, everyone recognizes this, but the institutional design doesn't reflect it adequately. And that's precisely where the combination of new forms of activism and new forms of technology can really make a difference. In order to make those connections between, say, urban air quality and climate change, two issues that are connected but different, and under the responsibility of different actors with different incentives and different institutional frameworks, one of the most important ways is to find methods, very practical methods, for putting value on positive moves to create change in the right direction. Putting value on things that in some cases have a market value, but it's one that is disconnected from its environmental implications, but more often doesn't have a clear, well-defined market value. And that's what the new digital technologies, in particular the various forms of decentralized ledger technologies, offer the opportunity for forms of value creation that go outside traditional market mechanisms and respond to one of the key challenges of climate change, which is the collective action challenge. Climate change is a prisoner's dilemma in the generic sense. It is very tempting to say, why should I move before he's moved? Why should I do anything before she's acted? If we don't do it all together, we can do nothing. And this is precisely the logjam problem at the level of global institutional design. The way to break out of that is either to create universal goodwill and confidence at the global level. Well, good luck with that, frankly. I don't think that's a very practical approach. Or to find ways of decentralizing and dispersing confidence, so that even in the absence of a global framework of mutual confidence, you can create technological mechanisms or other mechanisms, they don't have to be technological, which make it possible for an individual, a community organization, a small company, a city or whatever, to register the results of what it's done and obtain value, reputational value, but perhaps also direct monetary value in exchange for what it's done, which means that there are two connected challenges, both of which can be addressed in innovative ways by technology. One is certification. How do you know that what you did was worth doing? And the second is monetization. How can economic value be connected to beneficial outcomes that are not currently inscribed within a clearly defined market framework? And for both of those things, we have the potential already. But the potential has to be a potential of connectedness, a potential that first shows the ways in which the benefits of certain kinds of action spill over various kinds of agendas, connecting greenhouse gas emissions to noise pollution, to respiratory diseases, to ecosystem viability. The whole point of climate change is that somehow it connects polar bears to bees through a range of well-identified causal mechanisms, but quite long and diffuse ones. It's not obvious how polar bears and bees connect to one another. They don't often meet in the real world, but we know through science that they are closely connected in the world defined by climate change and biodiversity pressures, because they are among the species that demonstrate the systemic effects of human impact on ecosystems and, of course, internal dynamics within ecosystems as well. We have that scientific knowledge of the connections. We have a lot of artistic approaches that make visible these connections. What we need to close the circle is technological mechanisms that can also create those kinds of connections. And certification assumes that there is a trusted intermediary that can say that some measure has a value. Monetization means that there is some mechanism, sometimes an existing one, sometimes an entirely original one to be created, which allows that value as certified to unlock value that can be reinvested in purposes that require market-based costs. And the technology offers that possibility. But of course, the technology doesn't automatically produce it. For that, people need to commit to it. People need to commit to experimenting with things and using the technological levers to produce value through their experiments. People need to advocate for action and also advocate for the tools that can monetize action that doesn't produce direct market outcomes, and so on. This is the connection with youth engagement. There are other kinds of actors, of course, but we're talking here about the specific potential of young people through their action to make a difference. So there's simply no way in the very short time assigned to me, which is now up, that I could give any kind of detailed political or institutional or technical sketch of how to do this. But I'm convinced, and it's not a totally original idea, people have been working on this for a while, and some things have already been done in this area, but much more could be done. It could be much better scaled up. And it's not just an issue for geeks. This is an issue for anyone who cares about how the various dimensions of positive social transformations can, as I was saying, be certified, monetized. And just to close, I'd like to emphasize what is perhaps one of the key issues in this regard, which is the ability to monetize non-consumption. This already exists. There are various kinds of contracts, including financial derivatives, that allow you to get value from not doing something. Famously, a whole country managed to get paid by another country in the context of bilateral development aid not to develop a gas field in the Amazon. But that was a one-off, and it was bilateral. It wasn't mediated through any kind of a stable exchange mechanism. But if we are to achieve the kinds of objectives we need to achieve, one of the key challenges is to find a way of putting stable, predictable, certifiable value on non-consumption and allowing people who refrain from consuming to get direct economic benefits from doing so, that they can reinvest in the other things they decide to do. That is one of the ways in which I think, subject to a bit of imagination, a bit of luck, a bit of hard work, you can connect what Heta was saying, I think the core of everything she was saying, which I agree with. That's how the new resources and the new action potentials can be organically connected one to the other. And it's ideas for how to do that that I'd like to listen to in the rest of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for your inspiring presentation. And now I will add some more information on this Pact side. One element of the that I would like to contribute is to draw the attention of our audience to the work that the European Union is doing in the context of the European Green Deal. European Union has decided to implement the Paris Agreement and become climate neutral by 2050, and the political process and super project is the European Green Deal, and they have recognized that really for this big socio-economic transformation to be successful, it needs the buy-in. They need to get the hearts and the minds of the individual citizens really supporting this idea, and therefore they have created the European Climate Pact. And just today there was a webinar where they have presented the results of a consultation that was there for about more than 3,000 contributions have been submitted on how to get really the individual citizen engaged in with their pledges, and also cities and businesses, non-state actors in general. And the message that I would like to put here is that we have to partner the global goals and Paris Agreement implementation, UN FCCC process, Race to Zero campaign with the European efforts, because it's the same logic, it's the same people. And if we get individual citizen in a European country pledging to become climate neutral and doing all the necessary actions, this is also a contribution on the global level. And the European Climate Pact will be launched in November this year. And our consortium, our digital innovation community, and our youth partners, we are going to play our part and really help the European Union succeed, and then also scaling up and replicating these solutions on the global level. And now some information about what we have concretely developed as a digital climate pact app and individual climate action dashboard that will help the individual to get engaged in global goals attainment. And the challenge is we need everyone to become climate neutral. And actually, there are very few people who are really committing to climate neutrality. On the UNFCCC homepage, climatepledge.global, there are about 5,075 people who have taken the pledge. And it is also in the race to zero. There is not yet an entry point for the individual, and our consortium here wants to help develop these entry points and the engagement tools. And digital innovation can help to get it done. And a new narrative, a new social contract, which starts with the individual, it starts with me and you. And we can create together climate action communities which help one another based on specified give and gets, new kind of social contracts, and where we also give value to youth climate action potentials and reward them. And blockchain technology is a game changer, and we can then really develop a mechanism through which we will give people certified climate neutral lifestyle certificates. And the point is that the climate action and climate neutrality goals should be on everybody's mobile devices, and it should be some kind of game. And we are talking here, our proposal is a digital badges collection game, and it can be relatively simple, where we don't interact much, some kind of Robinson Crusoe version, but this is not very effective if there's only an individual person not connecting, and therefore there's the community solution, where people have on the one hand the individual climate action badge for committing to a specific smart goal, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, and then they get a badge for engaging in certain communities and thematic challenges or location-based communities, and then have their action logs, where they specify their actions and get it recognized based on open selfies collection. And then there's a blockchain-enabled digital climate pact and digital individual climate action dashboard, which is based on a global ecosystem of technological and non-technological infrastructure, interoperability standards, digital identity management, digital finance, smart contracts, and collective decision-making for trusted and accountable multi-stakeholder climate action. And that's what we are working on with the Climate Chain Coalition, with the D2I2, the data and digital innovation infrastructure, with the Open Climate Collaborathon, and also with the GLOCHA Global Challenges Partnership. And in November this year, we want to present their concrete results. And yeah, that's the main message is we don't need to wait for governments. There's so much that non-state actors can do. And let's really use the digital innovation that is at our hand, the potentials that are in our hands, and organize ourselves and really become climate neutral. It starts with me. And with this, I give the floor back to Martin to introduce the next segments of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Miroslav, and definitely thanks a lot, John, for those, again, amazing words and articulating a lot of complexity that is embedded into transformation, breaking into parts that we can digest, but also understand what are the key next steps, and as well inspiring work done by you, Miroslav. That concludes the first block, which is on Pacts and how do we engage on new types of social contracts using the power of technology. And the second one segues a bit of some of the things that John mentioned in terms of more innovative ways to monetize, monetizing action that can be certified or that needs to be certified, but also, as he mentioned, monetizing inaction, let's say what we don't do. And third, what are new and valuable tools that we can gather from the financial technology revolution or evolution, and in general the digital transformation phase. So our speakers are Alexei Shadrin, who I'll invite now to join, as well as Bobby Kia. So you can start connecting with your video, Bobby. And Alexei is actually one of the finance team leads at the Climate Change Coalition, a name that's been bounced around a couple of times already today. It's an organization that started right after the Paris Agreement in connection with UNFCCC. The two chairs are Tom Bauman, who may or may not join us later today, and Masamba Tioyip from UNFCCC. And it's around basically the discussion on where the intersection of emerging digital tools with a specific focus and interest on distributed ledger technology can best help the process of meeting and tracking the Paris Agreement. So Alexei joins from EverCity, a company that's been working on a lot of these tools, and it's great to see his work on also weaving other members within the Climate Change Coalition into practical digital stacks that in many ways, there's not just one specific solution. It's like different modules and different pieces that have to combine within a common puzzle. So look forward to your comments, Alexei, and the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is well. And hi, Miroslav. Thanks for hosting this wonderful session. This is a truly amazing opportunity to connect with people around the globe. And during these harsh times, we can discuss how we need to move on. And I'm pretty sure that digital technologies is one key to solving current challenges and to having the future we all want, the future in accordance with Sustainable Development Goals. So I've been into technologies for SDGs since 2016, and within my basic organization, which we founded in 2011, the Russian Carbon Fund, we've been looking into various technologies that can help us to combat climate change and its consequences. And our big idea behind the Russian Carbon Fund and behind EverCity, which is a new venture since 2018, was to always rely on your own. That's it. On everything you can do yourself, and not to look at the government, not to look at the UN or anybody else, or your parents who are telling you that you're not doing the right thing. Not the most the better path, but on the other hand, just implement what you have in mind, and everything will be successful with this approach. So we don't wait for something to happen, we just do it. And this is our motto for our company that I participate in and that we develop. So now I want to show you for a moment my presentation that I prepared especially for this event. And it's going to show you some of the projects that we're working on right now. And I think that, all these projects, they are somehow related to all the topics we are discussing today. So do you see my screen? Is everything all right?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, great. So I'm going to tell something about how we unite regional innovation ecosystems with digital technologies and acceleration process. And I think that really falls into all the topics we're discussing today, including the Pacts, including the ecosystem building, the youth component, and of course the digital innovations itself. So we're now running this digital SDG accelerator in Russia and in the former Soviet Union countries. in 5 countries, including Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Armenia. And it's all happened because we all face the same crisis, and in our region we face the same problems because all these countries are, you know, they came from the Soviet Union, they share the same borders, and our societies, our economies are somehow connected, interconnected, and they face the same sustainable development principles. So when we have this regional component, then we start to think how we can unite people here, and we realize that digital technologies is a proven antidote, you know, from the crisis, and everybody recognize it now, from UN to businesses and of course people. And it's great to share experience, technologies, knowledge, approaches, and so on. And this really helps us to build this ecosystem. So sharing is everything. And of course, we need synergies and concrete action. And today, all the speakers told us about that, and I fully agree. So our main aim, and something that helps us to implement this idea, because nobody supported us from the beginning with financial help, only with some kind of ideological support. So our big idea is to reach corporations that are now searching for digital technologies everywhere, with startups, with universities, with innovation ecosystems that actually develop those technologies. And by bridging them, by bonding them together, by developing joint pilots, we can really help to develop those technologies and deploy them in the most active manner. So we are now working with those businesses that face sustainability challenges and are helping them to find solutions in our region. And I'm really happy that we have support of the International Telecommunications Union and the regional head, Natalia Mochu, who is, I think, here. She was here before I started my presentation. So thanks a lot. And we have more than 25 partners from all of these countries from the region that joined us. And they all joined with something, with ideas, with media support, with I don't know, with sponsors who they can bring those sponsors to our accelerator. So this is a pretty much, you know, kind of horizontal initiative where we invite our friends, our partners, people who think alike, and they help us to make this happen. So the main aim is to make pilots with businesses, with corporations, then scale the startups. The next thing we are developing is a catalog of all these digital solutions to present them at the UN and other forums for the region. And this is also very important, that we have something to show people what exactly are the innovations, what are they doing, what are their impact on SDGs, and so on. Of course, we're trying to provide assistance to economic and social recovery programs that are in place right now. So we're gathering the solutions, and we hope that governments will hear us and will support these solutions. And we are signing an open letter, kind of a pact, although it's not the real kind of a pact, but it's something like a pact, an open letter to our governments so that they should include sustainable development goals into the recovery packages they are now designing and implementing. And this is also a very important thing. And we're not doing that on blockchain so far, but I think with Miroslav, we can develop some new platforms and formats to enable such initiatives and pacts. So now I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the use case we are working on within the accelerator and beyond that, and also with the help and assistance of the Climate Change Coalition. This is a digital green bond pilot, and this is a very innovative thing that we're working on already for half a year, and we've been working, so to come here to work on this pilot, we've been doing these kinds of innovations since 2017. So the main idea is to create a new financial and technological product. This is kind of two things in one. And from the financial side, we are working on the ways how we can connect the financial parameters of financial instruments, of the bond, of the coupon, which is paid by the borrower to investor for the usage of the money. And we are trying to design the ways, financial and economic ways, to connect the coupon rate with the impact properties, impact of the finance project. So this is also quite innovative. It's called sustainability linked bonds, and there are quite a few so far. So we are working on the finance methodology using the insights from UNFCCC, from other taxonomies like EU taxonomy and so on. And the other thing, the second part, is the blockchain part, where we're trying to program this logic, this financial logic, into the language of smart contracts and blockchains. And it's not going to be our proprietary private solution that we will keep as a secret. On the contrary, this is made as an open source technology. So once we complete this, once we have the financial study, once we have the financial component ready, then we will work on digitizing this component, making this open source. So anybody who would want to issue green bonds that are related to impact of the project, like renewable energy generation, CO2 emissions reductions, or maybe some social impact or anything. So they could use this set of smart contracts and issue their bond. And the third part is piloting these solutions using our platform, which we presented during the Conference of Parties in Madrid last year. And this is going to be one of our main products so far. So quite a few words about technology. So we have this platform, which is the kind of the one window to interact with all this smart stuff. We have some new generation of blockchains in partnerships, those blockchains that don't have the problem of high carbon footprint because they use other mechanisms of consensus of approving transactions, and also those blockchains that enable long-awaited interoperability of blockchains, because if we have different blockchains all around the world, this doesn't say that we can exchange the information between them and understand that something that we write down in one blockchain would not be repeated in the other blockchain. So this is something that industry really waits for. And also we use our open source software and our partners who help us bridge blockchains and IoT and stuff that we've been doing since 2017 within other projects. What we are expecting as the results. So we expect to issue the first bond, which is connected to the impact monitoring of the project. We are working with the real market participants, with a solar power company that will help us with the information, with the data that is originated on the power plant. And we're going to use historical data to make the modeling of the bond. So then we are piloting new approaches and recommendations from the UNFCCC, from some other approaches and methodologies that are now just being in design somewhere. And this is an opportunity for us to pilot them and to show to the UN how this can work, or this doesn't work, or we should think of something else. We're also assessing the feasibility of various options of how to use the sustainability linked bond, because there is no clear methodology so far. If you know some methodology, then please tell us. Also, there is going to be, we expect a big media campaign. We're going to showcase this experience at various high-level forums, and this is really important. And what really makes me happy about that is that this is, in fact, a contribution to recovery efforts and packages, because when we deploy recovery finance, when we deploy green finance all around the globe, we really need to know if the money is really flowing into the project, if the project is making the real impact, and if it is issuing the real carbon credits, the real bonds, and they're making the real change in the world. So this is something that we really need to improve with the current situation right now. And this is somehow the scheme of the bond, and we're gonna make some more announcements with more details. This is more technical scheme, but we're gonna show many times how this is used with made with blockchain, with interface, with the real market participants. We're going to make all that with the Climate Change Coalition members, and I strongly encourage you to join us on this journey and take part in the pilot, share your views, and see what can happen from this effort. And of course, this is going to be the first proof of concept, which we want to scale to municipal bonds and other bonds markets that are awaiting concrete solutions to increase transparency, trustability, and find new sources of capital. So this is pretty much it. I took, I think, too much time. And we're going to organize a lot of other events within Climate Change Coalition and in ATBA, and workshops, and talk about that in various dimensions.
Thank you very much, Alexei, and I think you've really helped us also walk through about how these components really fit into what we understand on financial innovation, and this is definitely one of the key parts that in some sense helps democratize normally complex financial deals like a debt structure for also communities that would have a harder time implementing financial structures that are normally relayed to economies of scale, such as project finance. So thank you very much. Maybe a question would be, how would people be able to be involved and stay connected to the discussion? Is there a working group? Is there a monthly meeting? Is it something that you're organizing through the Climate Change Coalition? If you can speak a little bit about that, I think the audience might enjoy.
Yeah,
as well.
sure. Thanks for the question. So yeah, we want to make this as open as possible. And we have various roles in this pilot, and we already have many applications from around the globe who want to participate in some way. Of course, there are fixed roles within the user story within this pilot. There is the issuer, we have him. There is the bank who organized the issuance. There is the auditor part and custodian part and so on. These are pretty much fixed. But for the other parts, like informational partners, methodology partners, technological partners, we are really welcome. And also, I think there could be many partners on each role, and this would be very important. We will make a special, more detailed announcement very soon during the meeting of the Climate Change Coalition and the NATBA, and we're going to make it visible to everybody, and hold some special seminars, some special working tables or something, like just open discussions like we're having now, and just look into the steps we're going to implement, discuss the results. And I think this would be really valuable to everyone, and I invite everyone to join.
Great, thanks. And maybe in the follow-up to this webinar, you can share some of your slides and maybe more details of those upcoming meetings for people that want to join. Our next speaker is Bobby Kia, who unfortunately had overlaps and might be able to join later. But Bobby joins us from the People's Prize and Sovereign Wealth Network. He will speak about Family Office Alliance on climate finance innovation, how to mobilize large-scale capital from high net worths, and also how to inform high net worths and sovereign funds on this. So we'll have to wait a bit till Bobby comes back and might be able to kick us off with some comments, which means that we move on to our third block today, our thematic block on data and digital innovation infrastructure for climate action tracking, reporting, and certification, but also diving a bit deeper into the role of non-state actors. Our speakers within the panel are, I'll speak about a little bit of this myself, but then also Tom Bauman and Matthew Phillips, who I think he's already online. And Tom, unfortunately, also had some data and connectivity issues in his end. Tom's one of the co-founders of the Climate Change Coalition, but he lives in a forest outside in inland Canada, and he just called me this morning saying, "Hey, my Wi-Fi is down," so we won't be able to join us, unfortunately. But I think between Matthew and I, we can give justice to this block. And actually, it's interesting because Miro mentioned this a bit in the beginning. In the last COP in Madrid, we launched an initiative that is still in the process of bringing in more, let's say, movement of movements, which is a general digital cooperation between all the right type of organizations and members that are often engaged in the context of COPs and the Paris Agreement to explore how we say in the Collaborathon radically collaborate in the context of the Paris Agreement and different mechanisms around it, such as the global stocktake. And we could, I'll start with a big background on my end and then pass the floor over to Matthew, if that sounds good with you. And there's not much more for me. I want to keep it short. As I mentioned at the beginning, I run the Yale Open Innovation Lab. And one of our key things is to work at the intersection of multi-stakeholder partnerships, emerging digital technology as it applies to climate and energy. And one of those projects started a couple of years ago when we were looking at how to think about new record-keeping, trusted digital record-keeping mechanisms, such as distributed ledgers, to, for example, track the state of our global carbon budget, the single accounts that we all share, because no matter where we are, we have the same atmosphere. And really, we're running against time here, and I think that's definitely something that we'll segue into what Matthew may be able to speak in terms of race to zero, because at the present rate, we're 7 years from busting out our carbon budget. That is an amazing number for us to think about creating irreversible resilience erosion of our planet in just the next couple of years. So this was definitely something that we thought digital technologies, but also processes of automation around this might be able to be interesting. Well, that unlocked, and we received different sort of research grants to dive deep into this, a whole wormhole around how actually digital tech fits within the Paris Agreement process and policy. And so that project, we call it Open Climate, and it has probably three important key parts. The first one is that whatever we do at the core level that connects us, we have to use open source and open trusted, open standards mechanisms. On one side, to enhance transparency, to ensure that we don't fall into proprietary IP, let's say, running our management of planet Earth and our climate. But on the other side, which is very important, particularly as we think about inventories, is ensure that that technology transfer between countries that are more developed digitally are able to easily share their software solutions with least developed countries. And that obviously is part of let's say, a non-market cooperation that can happen. And then, so the second point, so open source really is driving a lot of the discussion and a big push into the agenda of how do we also make sure that these are compatible with ongoing business models as well. The second point is we're seeing a burst in new actions, organizations, and companies finding ways of certifying climate action through the digital process of MRV, monitor, reporting, and verifying, which is very important for particularly the voluntary carbon market, which in itself also is in the process of transformation to make sure that it can adapt and connect better to the Paris Agreement and policy set under Article 6, which talks about climate markets specifically. So how can all of these initiatives speak to each other? Speak to each other in a digital world. So if you're creating a token that expresses a carbon sink from a forest project, how can that be also audited and understood by a similar framework that's elsewhere in the world that's under different registry? How are they able to speak, and more than anything, so that they can all be accounted? Because at the end of the day, every action that we do, either that it emits or that it mitigates or it adapts, has to account at the single common, let's say, global registry, which is planet Earth. And so that's one of the key areas of our work. And the third one really is around what we describe as nested accounting. And it's really thinking about engaging non-state actors from the bottom up. And that is definitely one of the things that UNFCCC, I think since since Peru has really spearheaded around how to bring in more activity from non-state actors, and definitely that's something that Matthew can speak to. But then also the actions, if we think about from a jurisdictional standpoint, a city, a company, and project, they're actually nest within relevant jurisdictions. For example, let's say subnational governments that have their own registries, their own inventories, and their own environmental monitoring registries that roll up to the national level inventory, which is precisely what countries submit to the UNFCCC to, for example, critically derive a global stocktake, which is something we expect to have our first formal one in 2023. And so nested accounting relates to how do we structure data and how do we structure our digital infrastructure in order to consider space, physical space and jurisdictions so that they can automatically roll up. It would make the life of a national inventory a lot easier if all the non-state actors structure their data, structure their carbon footprints, their pledges, and their mitigation credits in a certain way that automatically surfaces to the national level. And one of our large collaborators on this is the World Bank, who spearheads a project on a climate warehouse. So all of this is a bit about thinking about the future of our digital infrastructure for climate over the next 30 years. So the sooner we really can hash out the ideal architecture, the cheaper it will be to be able to manage our actions over time, and particularly how it pertains to finance and mobilization of capital. Now, the context of this project is so massive and so ambitious as you can expect based on what I'm describing, that we figured, well, this is definitely something that we can't, as a, let's say, humble lab in a university can develop. It really requires multi-stakeholder collaboration. So last year we launched a project that really thought about, okay, what are ways in which people collaborate or work on common digital solutions? And that's normally in the form of a hackathon. But normally in hackathons, teams compete against each other. And we thought, well, we don't want basically organizations and talented developers to compete against each other to see who's got the best solution. We want them to work on different pieces of a common puzzle. And so we launched the Open Climate Collabathon as a collaborative hackathon, which serves two purposes: to bring in multi-stakeholders at specific times of the year to work on different pieces of the Open Climate project, or at least the Open Climate landscape. And we are also in the process of organizing a global sprint in November that you'll be able to see more when you go to upcoming sprints here. This is Collabathon at openclimate.earth. But one of the important things also around the Collabathon is that we saw it as a very important way of bringing in youth engagement. So not just in addition to youth being able to speak in rallies in the street, actually also join networks and nodes. We have different ways for people to register as nodes and ambassadors to actually work on technical solutions and non-technical solutions together. One of the things that has been part of the webinar series that we've organizing with Miroslav is around what do we do this November when we think about the fact that COP26 is now postponed. So we're in a gap year. And I think that there's some key opportunities, and you'll be able to see us on a site. We'll update with more information about what our current plans are for November. This describes a bit of the structure of the Collabathon and forming teams, and we launched this in Earth Day. But really the main thing happens around November, when normally climate negotiations are happening, or at least in what the pre-COPs. So we wanted to fuse this into a mixture between a conference and an open source hackathon with specific prompts. And one of the key things that we want to focus this year is the independent global stocktake, which we think is an amazing opportunity for basically a highly inclusive action and non-state actors to participate in a form of parallel independent global stocktake that may help inform the UNFCCC in the cumbersome process, because it's certainly not easy to perform a formal GSD. So we have different prompts, and we'll create different panels for people to come in and join, but also these will segue into working groups. After having each panel, we'll structure different working groups for people for the rest of the 2 weeks to see how do we turn that discussion into actions, into frameworks, or even into digital code. So these are some of the thoughts, but particularly we're definitely interested in on the conversation that we can have around how can we also inform the process for future COPs, because we know that COPs have to transform in some sense. The lion's share of what COPs are about has been done. It's been the Paris Agreement, and now from now on, we have a huge role to think about what is the future of our green zones, open to the public, and perhaps virtual work can very much inform more inclusivity in those green zones, and how do we engage more non-state actors directly into the process. So with that, probably good segue is maybe inviting Matthew to share about his amazing important work from the UNFCCC side. Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us. It's been a pleasure also following your work through the NASCA portal now Global Climate Action portal. So hopefully you can hear a bit about what is very important on your end for your year, and how some of these discussions and these conversations and efforts can best help you, your team, and the general UNFCCC team have an easier process and achieve your milestones. The floor is yours, Matthew. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Martin, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I'm actually not sure that I should have gone after you, Martin, because I think you've actually started to indicate some of the solutions that we so desperately need within the UNFCCC. So let's see how this goes, and maybe we'll return to some of those solutions. But I think, as Martin made clear, yes, I'm Matthew. I work at the UNFCCC, the process that stewards the Paris Agreement. And I'm going to talk quickly about, as quickly as I can, about two aspects that I represent. One is the Global Climate Action Portal, and the other is the Race to Zero campaign. And these are distinct but quite related initiatives that we work on. What both the portal and the Race to Zero campaign are essentially trying to do is the impossible, which is to gather and harvest together as much climate action data as we can. And really the purpose of that is to really map out and provide a stock take for non-party stakeholders in the way that Martin was describing. And it's vast, challenging work. And I would say that perhaps, and please don't quote me on this, but you might now that I've prefaced this by saying that, it might not be actually the UN as the best placed institution to lead that innovative style work. Although obviously we need to be a part of that. So I just want to kind of tell you a little anecdote before I kind of go further to explain what I mean. So in terms of the Global Climate Action Portal, what that tries to do is kind of gather data from businesses, investors, regions, and cities from throughout the world. We currently have about 20,000 actors and about 25,000 actions. It's huge what we're trying to bring together. And I was once explaining this to the Chief Sustainability Officer of one of the biggest companies in the world. And she looked at me kind of bug-eyed, and she was very impressed. And she was like, wow, that's amazing what you're doing. What kind of software are you packing for that platform? And I said, that's interesting. We are just essentially packing a gargantuan Excel spreadsheet, because that's what the UN has done. We've taken all of these actions and we've put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then we've tried to take that into a governmental situation to push governments over the line to do more than they can do. So I'm saying all of this because what I'm describing is the fact that we need to do better in terms of this data harvesting. I know that, the UN knows that, and we need to be more innovative, which is why I think it's so interesting actually to have this discussion with all of you in terms of how you're doing that, because I think this is where the magic collaboration that you've all been talking about, radical collaboration, can really occur. Now, one way in which we're already trying to be better is we're trying to pivot, and a lot of you will know this on the call, from simply registering climate actions to tracking the progress of climate action. So at the moment, what we have in terms of the Global Climate Action Portal is some 25,000 actions that are basically like good intentions. It's like me saying that I'm going to give up drinking for a month. And I can tell you, I haven't given up drinking for any months during lockdown. That's impossible. So what I'm just saying is it's probably the same for businesses, cities, regions, and investors. Like, how do we know? How do we track their progress towards the promises that they've made? So the work that the UNFCCC is trying to do this year is actually to work out how we can track the progress of each of those 25,000 actions in terms of the percentage covered and all the rest of it. So our idea, through a very agonizing process, through radical collaboration with our stakeholders, is to arrive at the negotiations next year with the first indicators of how we will do that. And I think this will be also very useful as you seek to build your own innovative platforms around this, because I think we can share information, and that's absolutely the spirit in which we would like to be operating. So there are going to be some priority tracking metrics that we will be seeking to launch at Glasgow, because I should say that this isn't going to be a one-year project, right? This is going to be like a project that is going to keep us going until the global stocktake in 2023 and beyond, not to sound too Star Trek-like. So the ones that we're probably going to focus on in the immediate future are going to be things like emissions reductions, the percentage of commitments achieved, and then finally net zero pathway progress, because that is such a priority in terms of the ambition for both the presidencies governing the Paris Agreement process and also for the UNFCCC. So if I've got time, Martin, I might just tell a little bit about what we're doing in terms of net zero, because we launched last month, thank you, our flagship campaign, our flagship non-party stakeholder campaign, Race to Zero. And the reason we called it a race is because we realized that we wanted a compelling story around net zero by 2050 emissions, which we know could try possibly to keep the 1.5 stretch goal of the Paris Agreement alive within, and that's obviously how we've defined that. And we know that we're obviously quickly losing it from our graph. So that's why we've really centered upon this as being a priority. But our issue and our challenge is that I think a lot of people see net zero by 2050 as just kicking the can down the road of ambition, as big businesses getting up and going, we're going to do something in 30 years' time, but not taking the immediate steps that they need to now. So we've turned this campaign into a race. And if it's okay, I would just like to share some slides with you to show where we're at and where I think we need to go, if that's okay.
You should be able to share your screen as a co-host.
Fantastic. There we go. So this is the concept for the campaign, and I should say it's all rooted in now and obviously the recovery from the global pandemic that we're currently in. Right, we've got an opportunity to actually bounce back much better than we started if we get onto that net zero trajectory. And what's more, that net zero trajectory is going to make us more resilient, and it's going to help create jobs and make us more robust in the future. I'm going to whiz through this because what I'd like to do is show you where we've started with this campaign. We've already managed to assemble last month the biggest ever coalition of actors committed to net zero or better. Okay, so you can see all of the actors that we have currently signed up in the region of nearly 1,000 businesses, nearly 500 cities, so on and so forth. What the hell does this mean? Because this could all be your newsagent down the street, and that wouldn't mean anything at all. We've done some analysis with our partners. So we know already that these actors represent 53% global GDP coverage, 23 or nearly a quarter of global CO2 emissions, and actually nearly a third of the world's population. So not a bad baseline, but we need to go a lot further than that. And actually by COP, what we'd like to do is get to a situation where we more like had 70% global GDP. But what's more, we'd like to get other constituencies on board. We want sports clubs to get involved, SMEs to get involved, schools to get involved. We want this to be a kind of all society campaign so that we arrive in Glasgow next year with a resounding signal that the world is still committed to achieving the Paris Agreement temperature goals. So that's a broad scope. And then you'd be within your rights right now to call BS. I hope most of you understand what that means. I'm not going to kind of swear on this webinar for you, but what we've tried to do is really put in place a careful series of criteria around what we mean by net zero leadership. So I'm going to show you what that is. It's built around these 4 principles, which we developed with Oxford and with our partners. The 4 Ps. So this is pledge, plan, proceed, and publish, right? And the first is pledge your net zero commitment. It's a race. Hopefully it's much quicker than 2050. We're trying to actually inspire competition between actors. So the 2040 commitments and the 2030 commitments are very welcome. The second is you need to put in place a plan, an operational plan in terms of how you're actually going to do that, so that we can see that your money is proverbially where your mouth is. And you need to submit that plan in line with the science by COP26. The third element is you need to demonstrate how you're taking immediate actions now to meet your long-term goal. It's not about kicking the can down the road like we described. It's about actually showing how you're already on the path, you're already on the race, you're already hopefully winning that race. And then the final thing, which also speaks to what I described previously, is you need to report back every single year that you are honoring this goal to achieve. We need to know that you've really given up the booze, for instance, that you're committed to achieving this. So this needs to be published in a transparent way so we can take account of that. So that is how the Race to Zero criteria has been established. And our plan now, and we have a qualification committee set up that we now want to mobilize more actors in the way that I described, and more types of actors. And the point I just want to leave you on is, it's already been referred to in the top of this webinar that we don't have an entry point for people, and that's true, but we'd like to have an entry point for people. And I think there are three avenues that I would like to kind of posit as challenges. One is that we want the people to get on board with Race to Zero campaign as advocates. We want them to push businesses, their cities, their regions, their investors to get into the Race to Zero if they're not in the Race to Zero. We want them to show that the businesses that they work in or the cities in which they live should be meeting this target if they want to be on the side of the good. So that's the first thing, people as advocates. The second way that we want people to participate is as actors in their own right. So we will, and I'd love to have more conversations, try and think about how actors, people, individuals themselves can take actions that are commensurate with the net zero 2050 pathway. So that's the second thing. And the final thing is, how can people or young people get involved as innovators, which is kind of the whole framing of this webinar, to make sure that this message really lands, that we're doing the right analysis, that we're threading together all of this data and coming into Glasgow in the right place. So I hope I didn't go on too long, Martin, but those are my thoughts on the portal and on Race to Zero. Thank you.
No, that's amazing, Matthew, and it's also a bit daunting to understand your job, where you sit, and like was said, just a massive amount of work that needs to be piped together and clearly described to the general public to provide a layer of transparency and accountability, not just to parties, for everyone else. And I think you've laid out the roadmap of how we can all need to think about how we can support the Global Climate Action Portal and the Race to Zero campaign. And there's definitely ways in which you mentioned we can do that. And particularly in terms of that innovation, is how can we think about solutions so that you don't have to deal with a gargantuan spreadsheet, and we can think about what are the right practices that would be logical for your team to adopt, and not just for the team, but just for the businesses, for the cities, so that when they share that with the platform that then route that to the Global Climate Action Portal, all of that can have a perfect trail of trust and robust data, and also reduce the cost of cleaning and organizing all of that, because that also is a massive budget itself. We need to be able to design it from the bottom up, and that is an amazing opportunity for innovators out there, particularly data scientists and technologies, to come up with solutions that are open source, that they can also be adopted by the UN in their practices. Thank you so much, Matthew. And perhaps if you make the slides available, we could also share them so that they can think about who's the right person within their constituency that they need to press, send an email, advocate to make sure that they sign up in that climate action portal in the lead up to COP26.
Very happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we move to our final block, routing back to the beginning on youth engagement innovation. And I'll pass the floor to Miro to introduce the session and take us forward. Miro, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Martin, for these wonderful two thematic blocks. And thanks, Matthew. It was really so inspiring to hear about your very important and very challenging work. It's really wonderful to have you with us. And thanks for your words of openness to innovation and cooperation. That's perfect, really. Together we are stronger, and it's very inspiring. And as we've had there a lot of discussion also going on in the chat, and we have now this session planned on youth engagement innovation, I would like to first, as an introduction to this session, ask Luisa de Graaf from Brazil to share with us also some of her thoughts, because Latin America is a part of the world that we have not covered today here. And please, Luisa, tell us what you think and what kind of support youth and the general public in Brazil and Latin America would need.
Hi, thank you for letting me participate. I'm still very young and I'm starting my career at the United Nations now. And for now, I think all I can do is share the challenging questions that come to my mind when I'm watching these conversations. One of the questions is, how do we get the message forward and mobilize a greater number of people in developing countries, countries where we cannot depend on politicians and we have a big number of uneducated population? And how do we make people realize that we are not mere spectators? We are affected by this, our subsistence, our communities, our families, and our lives are at stake. And I've been thinking a lot. I want to have the answers to those questions, but I'm still in the process of figuring out. So I was wondering, maybe one of you have some insights for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luisa. And it's also, for me, when I've seen last year the Amazon burning and seeing that the existing public structures are not really capable and willing to take action, I was really, it was painful for me. And so I really am fully committed also to find innovative ways to empower people like you in your countries, and because everybody needs to take action and everybody needs to be empowered. And therefore we are happy to have Doug Reagan with us from UN Habitat, who is our partner and a leader and champion in youth empowerment for sustainable development action. Doug, please take the floor and share with us your thoughts about how digital innovation and resource mobilization and social innovation can work together in this consortium that we are building now.
Thanks so much, Miro, and really happy to be here. I'm phoning in from Nairobi, Kenya. As you can see, it's a bit darker here than it is on your side of the world. But yeah, really honored to talk, and also just listening to Luisa, as she says, starting out her career in the UN system, and looking for ideas and where to go and such. And it's funny, oftentimes now working here in Africa, as well as I've worked in North America and stuff with young people, I think I turn the tables off and then look for inspiration from young people. I mean, I think we do, we have to, as older adults and as the the people who are the majority in the system, have to, of course, pass on our knowledge and our wisdom and such, and oftentimes just get out of the way. But I think that what we've seen with this climate change and what's happened with climate change, whether it be with Greta, with Fridays for Future, and so on, that we see that we need new ideas and we need innovation. And it's from Luisa and from others from your generation that we're looking for that, because to be quite honest, it's my generation that screwed it up. And so we really are looking for that in the UN system. I think we really recognize it. I work with UN Habitat, which is the UN agency in charge of cities and towns. It's been sustainable urbanization. We focus on SDG 11. We've done a lot of work with Miro over the last decade in trying to bring about innovation in a sustainable way. But what I'd like to focus on a bit, yes, I'd like to focus on innovation. And yes, I fully recognize the power of young people in innovation and such, and really recognize that we need innovative approaches. But I also think without inclusion, without including all voices, that we miss out in so much, because we can innovate in a very small environment. And we all know that ecological diversity is critical, and as well, people diversity is critical. We've had seen some amazing young people come forward. I was just looking, there just popped up yesterday, Angelina Jolie's interview with Vanessa Vash, who is a activist here from East Africa. And again, bringing up all the issues, the Me Too generation, and how young women, and again, the climate change movement reflects young women. It reflects what young women see as the values. And unfortunately, not to get too technical and throw words about, but we live in a patriarchy. I mean, it's men who have driven to the cliff the issues of the world as it is today. We need to take into account women's perspectives, and especially young women's perspective, and that's in our face with the climate change movement. We also need to look at the majority of the people in the world, and the majority of the people live in the developing world, in Africa, and we're in Brazil, where Louisa is, and they are the ones. Innovation is, it's quite interesting. Here in Nairobi and in Kenya, Kenya is seen as one of the most advanced technologically, one of the more advanced technologically in Africa. And I was doing work here in 2011 and 2012 when the first fiber optic cable came and was landed in Mombasa, which is on the coast of Kenya. And at the time, about 2 years later, Lance Ito, who is who's a well-known, or was a well-known person in the tech field, was here, and he was speaking, and someone in the audience at a place called the iHub, which is in Nairobi, it's a technology hub in Nairobi, and someone put up their hand and said, "Why are you here? Like, why Nairobi? Why in Kenya?" And he said, "Listen, the speed gets faster. When internet speed gets faster in North America, you could download your favorite show," and he at the time used Mad Men, which is a bit old now, but nonetheless, he said you can download Mad Men, the season of Mad Men, that much quicker. But he says when you get the internet here, and when you can download things, and when your speeds get here, another million people get online. It's the process here in Africa, in the South, is that it's a much more for the people of the people process. It's a much more, when technology here is used, and it's used at the base level, at the bottom of the pyramid. It's not used just to do things like download movies quicker. So I mean, what we see here is a lot of the innovation, especially I work in slums and informal settlements where 1 billion people in the world live. And what we see is that these technology and innovation is used there to directly improves people's lives, whether it be through mapping, whether it be through geospatial mapping and such, and mapping in places that aren't mapped. And this really links to climate change, because we need to look at the innovations that impact the most people. We oftentimes don't take our blinders off when we're looking at technology and innovation. Oftentimes we it's framed often by the North American or the European perspective, which says that, gee, if it works here, it works everywhere. Well, that is not the case. It is not the case that technological innovations in the developed world directly translate into the developing world. And to get that perspective, we must assure that we include those people who are from that part of the world. And so I think, for example, in COP, we worked with UNEP, one of our partners, and who's going to be Alex, who's going to be speaking next. And we said, okay, we need to bring the voices of the developing world, and we need to make sure that they're also women's voices. So we had a big session that was headed up by my executive director, Maimuna Mohd Sharif, who's originally from Malaysia, or is from Malaysia. And we had a big session focused on young women leaders from the developing world. And I tell you, they're incredibly dynamic, and to the credit of Greta Thunberg, because oftentimes, you know, she's slammed for being elitist and so on. Well, she is not. I mean, the woman is the most democratic. I mean, she's very Swedish, democratic. She believes in good governance. And so she was totally embracing these young women and moving them forward. When you're looking at the issues, like I follow pretty much, we as UN Habitat follow pretty much all these young women leaders and some young men in Africa who are doing climate change work, and they're taking on issues such as what has happened here in East Africa. East Africa is not only is dealing with climate change, but the climate change is reflected by a plague of locusts. So locusts in the Horn of Africa have been devastating, the worst we've ever seen. As well, we've also seen flooding that is the worst we've ever seen. So while we're dealing with this time of COVID, and the thing that's interesting, and I know I'm bringing another issue here and I have to wrap up, but the thing that's interesting about COVID is it's showing the gross inequalities in the world. And with education and so on and so on, we need to take that learning and assure that the climate change movement is inclusive, that it does include developing countries and their voices in the majority of the world, that it does include young women. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thanks very much for being such a great partner over all these years, and for being a bridge builder also to the local level, to the local communities where there is a lot of need for empowerment and capacity building, and looking forward to work on these issues in the future. As Alex from UN Environment and the World Environment Situation Room is not here yet, I would give the floor to Marie-Louise Burgener from Green Go Web, who has her own initiatives and plans in the field of youth empowerment and citizens engagement in climate action with gamification. So Marla, please take the floor and share with us your ideas and your creative thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this very, very interesting panel. So I'm an entrepreneur. I created Green Go Web in 2012, and it was one of the first mobile applications to use gamification to engage employees in multinationals and sustainable behaviors and measure impact. So all the impact and metrics were certified by the EPFL in Switzerland. So that's our polytechnical school. So that's in a nutshell. And from this work, I collected data anonymously. And with the data, I was able to look at this and then present. I will share a brief presentation with you. And then present to Co-op 20 at Co-op 23 and Co-op 24. Share my screen. So loading somehow. So in any case, my work has to do with data for common good, climate change mitigation, meaning engaging citizen employees, people, bottom up, in order to, here we are. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So, okay, that's not working. How can I get the, this is not the one. Oh, sorry. So in any case, based on my work, I'm now starting a doctoral thesis, and my topic, here, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, based on the
3
data,
minutes, 4 minutes. 3 minutes.
I'd like to work on research on green gamification, bottom-up data, citizen engagement, and obviously data for good. And I will just share with you some thoughts. So, can we accelerate the SDGs, engaging citizen bottom-up with gamification? Can we use the People's Co-op to pilot and measure engagement towards the SDGs? What are the limits to digital engagement? Can we use blockchain to make these rewards tangible to create a virtuous circle? And last, can we categorize this data and build an open source project for the common good? Meaning, to what extent could we explain to people which data should not be shared, which data should be shared, and then have an open source project where people would share with us, for example, their consumption, but not necessarily their private data. So these are my thoughts, my leads for my thesis. And I would like very much so, but I don't know if it's going to be possible, to use the Co-op 26 to pilot such a project, because my thesis, my doctorate is going to be very tangible. I want something that we can measure and that we can use to move forward, to tackle, at least to advance climate action and SDGs engagement. Ta-da.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Marie-Louise.
Marilo.
Sorry, Marilo. sorry.
Marla is fine. Thank you very much. If you have thoughts, please do contact me.
Yeah, I would. Perhaps you share your email also if there's somebody who would like to connect. I was in the chat. I've seen also that Evelyn Batamuliza would like to have a brief discussion also on the ideas that John Crawley has presented. Therefore, I was pushing a little bit. And Evelyn, are you still with us? Okay, let me. So I have requested her. Evelyn. Okay, if that's not.
Hello.
Ah, you are here. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was for some reason muted, so I was trying to report. Yeah, thank you so much for a really great discussion. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to all the speakers that have been in this conversation. And it's really, really important and critical. And honestly, if we have the time in the world, it would be good to organize like a separate session for each for each participant who really engage in this, because I find myself running a lot and really identifying with many of the points that are raised. But if we have the time and if all other participants feel, it's important for them to really discuss a little bit big, not really big, we won't have much time, but at least really explore the ideas of the incentives that John started with, the incentives for climate finances. How do we do that? What do we know is happening out there? How do we take this conversation forward? So if we can revisit those ideas in these few minutes, will be really useful. And if that makes sense for other participants anyway.
Yeah. And could you please also say a little bit about from where you are joining and what you are doing?
Yeah, sure. Yes. Thank you so much. So I've always worked on issues of climate change financing, and recently I was in Asia Pacific with the UNDP and working on governance for climate change financing. But now I'm back in Canada, in Victoria, and I'm doing some work with the African Development Bank around making sure that public and private sector, come together in financing for adaptation. There is this new initiative called Adaptation Benefit Mechanisms, which tries to raise funds for both public and private, and specifically for adaptation projects in Africa. So hence, I guess my interest of really wanting to explore those ideas that were raised with John in this. So in a nutshell, that's who I am and that's what I'm engaged in.
Wonderful. We are happy to have you with us. John, are you still online? Can you join?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, super. Do you have any additional thoughts and information that?
No, the one thing I would say is that I think a lot of the issues I raised in quite vague and general terms have been filled in by what other people have said in the meantime, including the question of how you can identify actions, the question that was addressed explicitly, the question of how to check whether actions are producing tangible results, which was clearly raised as an issue, not resolved, something that needs further work, clearly. And the question of how technology platforms, including distributed ledgers, can provide a decentralized way of locking in the technical recognition of the value of actions taken and create the basis for innovative forms of monetization, not necessarily through the ability to convert into standard cash. It can also be other kinds of value approaches that permit trading of value with among a closed community and so on. The key point being that at some level, what we need to achieve is backing currency by the real assets that the world can sustain. That's the kind of conceptual framework, which is very familiar. We know that if we had serious global accounts for natural capital, we have been in a serious recession for a few decades. We are maintaining current consumption by running down capital. You could argue we're doing that to some extent even with human capital, which would be an interesting discussion, but one that goes in a different direction. But certainly with respect to natural capital, we're basically running it down and living off the sales. There are attempts, including some very well-known attempts. UNEP has a whole big project on this, and there are others, to reshape the way we think in terms of national accounts, which is one angle for addressing this issue, having a better idea of what we are destroying every time we maintain established levels of consumption. But in addition to that macro approach, what we're talking about is something that at the micro level might achieve the same things. In other words, identifying the value, positive or negative, that a particular intervention has in terms of the overall sustainability of the system, in terms of a proper valuation of all the varieties of capital that are relevant, including natural capital, and as I said, ideally including human capital as well. And doing that not through a top-down conceptual exercise, but through a bottom-up quasi-market exercise is complementary, fascinating, to be explored. The question is how to, well, one of the many questions is how to mobilize the energy, the technical resources, the finance for something that by its very nature is experimental. So you can't point in advance to the results you will definitely produce. You need to get commitment to the spirit of doing it and to a reasonable likelihood of producing something of value.
Very good.
Experiments are harder to fund.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen Alina Simonovska from the Russian National Youth Council was also active. And Alina, if you would like to say a few words, and then I give back to Martin for some concluding thoughts. Alina, please.
Yeah, hello. I hope everyone can hear
Yes.
me. My name is Anna, and I'm a representative of the National Youth Council of Russia. And first of all, thank you for this session and for the opportunity to share the information about our program with you. I'll try to do it briefly. In 2017, SDG Youth Ambassador in Russia program was established in order to mobilize the youth generation who can contribute to the effective implementation of the 2030 agenda into concrete action in the context of Russian national strategy and the field of the implementation of the SDGs. And this program is a national version of the United Nations Young Leaders for SDGs initiative, which was launched in 2016. Our program is a public non-profit project of the NYCR implemented with the support of the Ministry of Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, the Federal Agency for Youth Affairs, and the United Nations Information Center in Moscow, and others. Within the framework of our program, talented young people with background in field of SDGs, during 1 year, promote SDGs among Russian youth, raise awareness about global problems and ways to address them at the local and national levels, as well as engage their peers in the implementation of SDGs. And our youth ambassadors participate in national and international events as speakers, promote the program and organize their own events, and participate also like in climate change events and many other topics. And I think it's all information that I like to share with you. And if you will have any questions, suggestions, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Thank you very much, Alina. Good to have you with us. And with this, I give back to Martin.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an extremely inspiring set of voices that in some way are choiring together for a common message. And wondering, Miroslav, for the next, let's say, 8 minutes we have left, how do we tackle a bit of participative discussion? Some quick thought is that the people that have been listening up to this point, if they have questions and thoughts, maybe they can write them directly in the chat for a specific speaker. I also see Doug has his hand up, so that is another way that you may want to pose a comment or question. Feel free, Doug, to make your point, and then invite everyone else also to create questions or points of discussion that may be helpful on steps going forward to make sure that this dialogue continues throughout the year, building continued and compound interest momentum. Doug, go ahead. I think you're on mute.
Unmute. Just wanted to pass on the apologies of Alexander Kaldas. He got held up in an emergency meeting and wasn't able to attend. But I just wanted, so as I mentioned up the top and I put in the chat, we're starting up a Young Climate Change Makers program. It is being done with the British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver, as well as it's sponsored by the Canary Islands and the city of Tenerife. And we will be doing that program over a year, starting probably in September. And it'll be there'll be a conference. It was supposed to initially be face-to-face, of course, but now it's going to be online, and ongoing curriculum basically on how young people, we're going to very, very much focused on young people in the developing world, but also more marginalized young people, such as Indigenous youth, LGBTQ, and so on, how they can be engaged in the climate change movement and how we can better enhance and increase their capacity to do whatever they're doing. So I just wanted to mention that quickly. I've put our website, www.unhabitatyouth.org. You can see what we're doing, a lot of it right now in the informal settlements and slums in Africa, around COVID currently, but hopefully we will be transitioning to climate change. So just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you, Doug. And I see Janina, you're online. Maybe you can share some words as well. Madonna, I have a feeling that you're trying to connect. There's an issue with your camera, unfortunately, but maybe you could just come through with audio. Janine, I noticed you're a fellow Argentinian, so please feel free to share your thoughts and comments.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Janina. I'm 20 years old, and I'm speaking from Corral de Bustos, a little town in the Córdoba province here in Argentina. And I'm studying political science, design, and now I'm I'm trying to understand data sciences, but online, because I'm part of Friday for Future here, and I'm coordinating the area of public policy, and we are trying to innovate in technologies to can how I can say it. Sorry for my English, I don't practice so much. We are trying to reach more people in Rosario, the city that I'm studying, with technologies. We are trying to do that, and in the first step we do was a massive spam in the comments of an Instagram post of the Minister of of environment here. And so we do a first contact with the government, and now we are working with them. And so we're going in that way, but here in Argentina, the environment is not a priority always. No, I mean, we have the 50% of the people in the poverty. So it's very difficult to try to keep the people working in the environmental, because it's not a priority here. So that is very difficult. So I would like to say that. Thank you.
And to that extent, how to make sure that it's not an either or, right? So that we address socioeconomic inequality and environmental issues at the same time. I think you mentioned something interesting around how you, as trying to push forward and a bottom up from your environmental movement locally, how can you learn from better practices from other groups around the world, youth engagement groups, to better reach more people, as you mentioned from Rosario. And it also kind of makes me think about some of the comments from Matthew that he mentioned early in regards to how can groups like yours and initiatives like yours help create more committed constituents, let's say from the head of cities in where you are in Argentina, to have a more of a solid presence within the Global Climate Action Portal and commit to accountability. So maybe those are interesting take-home things to ponder and see how to further that from your side of the world. And I'm with that, I'm wondering if Madonna, who is also trying to connect, even though the video isn't coming out well, perhaps you can, I just unmuted yourself, so feel free to share some words.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry for the technical issue with the camera. I don't know what's happening, but it's better with the audio. I'm so sorry. I'm Madonna from Cairo, Egypt. I'm really honored to be with you here. I heard a lot of amazing, really amazing ideas from everyone here. That's a great time here. Just what I want to say, that we have all to work on climate action. And here in Egypt, we don't wait for the government work. What we need in the whole world, in my opinion, is two things we have to work on: raising the awareness of all people to get them engaged in the work on the climate action. Like the former, we have to raise their awareness about burning the rest of the fruit. It's not right. We have to raise this awareness, and we have to encourage recycling. We have to work on those technological issues in the whole world. What I want to say, I'm really honored to be a new member in Bluestar, and I will try to do my best to help in solving the climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Madonna. Thanks for sharing your voice. And I see that Antje is also online. Maybe you'd like to share some words. I just unmuted you, so feel free to share some thoughts and comments.
Oh, now I'm a little bit nervous. I'm quite new at this topic, and I also wrote to Miroslav that I'm actually now trying to get familiar with those discussion. So I'm actually quite planned to get a little bit of information from you, and so maybe it takes some time then when I can join you with your big discussion and informative and yeah.
Great. Well, at least you bless us with your presence, just like everyone else has made this yet another very engaging dialogue in a very pivotal year where really these topics have to fuse and connect: digital technology, innovation, youth engagement, public-private partnerships, non-state actions connecting to state level, and also the power of collaboration, probably the most important technology we are yet to master, since much of our innovation paradigm has been driven by competition, and competition as the driver for it. And I think we need to have transparent competitive markets, business and actions on the ground. Miroslav, we are out of time. Perhaps you can say some words on next steps and follow-ups, which we could definitely do in regards to email threads, and what some of the audience might expect for upcoming webinars and opportunities for engagement.
Yeah. So thanks everybody, and especially also Martin, for hosting our event and co-chairing this so competently. And it was really inspiring and insightful. And the next steps will be, as we said, this is now really, today's webinar was a presentation of our consortium, so to say. We are looking at systemic solutions on how we can create engagement opportunities for youth and the individual citizen in climate action with digital tools. So on the one hand, we will continue really formalizing this cooperation, consortium building, also connecting it with the Race to Zero campaign and the work that Matthew is doing, really offering this our initiative as a partner to the Race to Zero campaign, because there's already existing a formal engagement mechanism which we will follow. And then we will prepare for November. November will be the big time in our year where we will create the big bang. We will bring all the non-state actors, social energy, and the potential of digital technology, and also innovative sources for financing together under this hashtag People's COP. And then we will see what will develop out of it. But I think we have the power, and we have the technology, we have the determination, and we are willing and ready to work together, and so we will have big impacts, I have no doubts.
Great, beautiful closing remarks, and thank you everyone for making this happen. Here's follow-ups, the virtual applause for everyone, and we'll keep connected for future possible engagements in the road to November. We will also post the video of the recording on the Collaborathon YouTube, and I encourage you to again join on collaborathon.openclimate.earth, where we will also continue posting information for engagement in the lead up to November, which will act as a form of movement of movements, so that it's truly bottom-up engagement, and nothing more appropriate than a world that now is, in some sense, forced to connect virtually, so that we can drive more inclusivity. With that, I think our session is over. Once again, thank you, and we'll post follow-ups and video soon.
Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.